Hi, everyone. I'm Monica Robbins, and thank you so much for joining us this evening. You are in the WKYC forum discussion of a very important topic. January is Human Trafficking Awareness Month, and tonight we want to raise awareness and we want to educate as well. And we want to shed light on how the pandemic has unfortunately made a bad situation even worse and what we might be able to do about it. Now, according to the Ohio Department of Health, human trafficking is one of the fastest growing criminal industries in the world, illegally earning, get this, more than $35 billion, which equals the profits earned by Starbucks, Google, and Nike combined, just to give you an idea of how big the scope of this problem is. U.S. human traffickers use violence, threats, deception, debt bondage, drugs, and other manipulations to force people to engage in commercial trade, commercial sex, or provide labor services against their will. Victims can include people of any age, including children and seniors. So why are we discussing this? Because Ohio has ranked as high as 5th among all states in total reported human trafficking cases. And Toledo, which is just 2.5 hours down the turnpike from Cleveland, is identified as the 4th highest ranking city in the nation for recruiting victims into this illegal trade. So if you think it's just 2 hours away from us, you're wrong, because it happens here too. I have gathered tonight a group of incredible experts on the front lines of this issue. Kirsty Mounsey is the new president and CEO of the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking. Kathleen Hackett is a nurse and pediatric SANE program coordinator at University Hospitals in Rainbow. Detective James Mackey is director of the Cuyahoga Regional Human Trafficking Task Force. And Karen McHenry is with the Homeless and Missing Youth Programs of Belfair JCB. And of course, Sandra Miller is the president and CEO of the Cleveland Rape Crisis Center. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. Kirsty, I'm going to start with you. You have just taken over the collaborative. Quickly, how did you get involved in this issue and why?
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Monica, and thank you so much for hosting this panel tonight. This is really an important conversation for us to have. So why did I get involved in the collaborative? Well, I just come to the collaborative from 20 years, pretty much close to 20 decades in the anti-violence field, in the anti-violence movement. And so anti-human trafficking work was always a part of that, especially since 2007, when I first heard of the Collaborative to End Human Trafficking and first met Karen and Anne and the other folks here at the organization and really got involved with the incredible work that they did. This organization here was really built on the understanding that a complex social issue like human trafficking can simply not be solved by one organization or system alone. It is way too complex. So only if we come together across sectors and with a common agenda will we have any success in beating this. So I was really attracted to the mission of this organization because as the backbone organization for these efforts in Northeast Ohio, the Collaborative is the convener of the Greater Cleveland's Coordinated Response to Human Trafficking, which everyone here in this forum is a part of, and where we bring together over 60 organizations, system, businesses from government, nonprofit, and for-profit sectors to put this collective impact into action in the fight against trafficking. So Monica, as you said, human trafficking at its core is the business of exploiting people for profit, which is a worldwide billion-dollar industry, and that can involve sex, labor, and sometimes both. Traffickers target victims by exploiting their vulnerabilities and use violence to control them, and that involves coercion and threats. And what we have found that these vulnerabilities that traffickers prey on have been exacerbated by COVID-19. What we're finding is that financial hardship, including housing insecurity, school closures, children and adolescents spending more time online, increasing risks that could lead to trafficking situations. And for those already in trafficking situations, COVID-19 has definitely worsened their circumstances. COVID-19 makes the identification of trafficked individuals and survivors much more challenging. We'll hear more about that from our partners here around the table. And it makes it much harder to deliver comprehensive services to support survivors' recovery. Also, COVID-19 has put a burden on hospitals, and Kathy will talk more about that, and deterred victims from utilizing medical services. So this well-coordinated community-wide response that we have created here in Cuyahoga County has definitely been strained, and there's a definite need for refocused strategy on how to respond to human trafficking during this pandemic. So that's why I'm here and what I want us to talk about tonight.
Thank you so much, Kirsty. All right, Karen, I'm going to jump over to you because I know every parent watching this tonight has this issue at home, especially if they have a school-age child. Because one of the biggest impacts of the pandemic is keeping kids at home to learn. And we already know that the internet is just one of those places where traffickers prey on children. So how has this pandemic made an impact there? And of course, what is your advice for parents?
Well, thank you, Monica. So yes, Belfair is here to provide help and hope. And I know that with the pandemic, lots of people were forced to stay home. As Kirsty said, like the schools are closed, now the libraries are closed. So where does somebody go, like a teenager, to get help and support? A lot of kids used to get a lot of support from their school. They used to get food from their school, and there was somebody there that they could probably confide in and talk to. So we know that parents are home like way over multitasking, like multitasking is like not even ample anymore because we're going into a year of this. So in the beginning, we had the crisis and we were all in response mode, but these victims of sex trafficking are right in front of us. Your child at home could be in a situation where they're being groomed on the internet. So that is the biggest issue with the pandemic, is that like we just opened up the internet for kids for multiple hours every day. And they're so isolated that if they don't know how to socialize and they can't see their friends, you know, they might have turned to different avenues on the internet or different apps to stay connected. And those can be extremely dangerous. So Belfair is here and we have our hotline to support parents, to support students. And we work with all of our community partners, especially the people that are right here in front of us today. And, you know, we just want to make sure that the kids know and the parents know that Belfair is here to help, and we can answer questions, we can do safety planning and explore some of the concerns that the parents might have. So to make sure that their child's safe.
Is there anything specific parents need to be aware of? Anything they need to be looking for when their kids are on the net for hours in a day?
I mean, so we always recommend to like just sit down and have some of those conversations with your child. I know we're all like on top of each other, sick of all being home together, but when they're in a good mood to sit down and have this conversation about like, what are you looking at? Looking at their Instagram with them. Who's this person? I never heard of them before. Or wow, look at that picture. So having these conversations in a non-threatening, compassionate manner is a good place to start. And then if you start to notice that, you know, there's different apps, like most of the dating apps and the really scarier apps tend to be on the phone. So that's something to look at. And as far as the internet, like what are they, you know, you can look at your child's history to see like what have they been searching. And it's just important to monitor that because kids are isolated, they're anxious, they're depressed, and they've been stuck at home now for almost 12 months.
You also focus on homelessness and child abuse. How has the pandemic impacted those issues, especially with job loss and the stress of this dealing in this time right now?
So yes, I mean, homeless and missing youth, particularly the kids that are missing right now, we're just so worried about them. So if there is anybody listening that's in a place that they don't feel safe or they're not stably housed, we also recommend that they call the hotline. We just know that we used to see students at school. We used to run into youth that needed help at the libraries. So now we use a lot of our social media to make sure that youth know that we're still out there. But it's really hard. So we want to make sure, I mean, there's more than 200 kids listed as missing today in Cuyahoga County. We know that that number at Belfair is much, much higher because people are not reporting their kids missing. Historically, the number is only 25% of kids are ever reported missing. So we want people to try to connect with, you know, their neighbors, their family, making sure that people are where they're supposed to be and that they're safe. Kids are in a bind right now, and there's just lots of barriers for partners such as all of us to help them and get to them.
I'm noticing, I just saw this stat here, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children noticed an increase from 2 million to 4.2 million reports of online exploitation between March and April of 2020 alone. Have we ever seen anything that huge before?
No, I mean, it speaks to the pandemic. I always say, like, if it ever does end, that it will be so interesting to look back at this history and what happened, because I don't think we're going to even really see the consequences for many years to come. But Belfair is here, and we are doing counseling, and we have residential treatment and all sorts of services. So we just really want to make sure that people know that Belfair is still here, because we have heard that people thought like that a lot of our agencies just, you know, weren't seeing people anymore because there's a pandemic and you have to stay home. But those are some of the benefits to the internet, that, you know, we do telehealth. So you can still get support at almost every organization that we're working with. So we just want to make sure that people aren't home feeling hopeless and helpless, and that they know that there's still people here that want to help.
That's awesome. Kathleen, I want to jump over to you now. Aside from law enforcement, you are likely one of the first people that a survivor sees. Can you describe, for those who may not know, what exactly is a SANE nurse? What does that stand for, and what do you do? You're muted. It's okay.
Thank you so much for having me. And yes, a SANE stands for Sexual Assault Nurse Examiner. We are registered nurses with specific education and training to care for patients who've experienced sexual violence. We provide holistic, compassionate, non-judgmental care for our patients. We also coordinate all the medical services, medications that they may need to keep them from getting infections. We connect them to our community partners, such as the people that are here on the call today. We also assess their safety. So this is really important, coming to the hospital and to be able to see a SANE nurse. And we're very fortunate we have a fair amount of SANE nurses in our community.
So, you know, we're dealing with a pandemic. One of the first things we saw, obviously, the hospitals had to completely change the way they ran business. I can't imagine the challenges that you had to endure during this pandemic. Talk about what those are and how are you getting around them? How are you dealing?
Sure. The challenges can be overwhelming, but the one good thing to know that medical providers are very resilient. We're used to changing our speed in a minute. We're used to changing gears. And so initially, with everything shutting down, we actually saw a great decrease in patients coming to the emergency room. And so that left us, when we don't have patients, we're not able to identify anybody who may be at risk. So then we started picking up and our ERs became overwhelmed. And so that created another different kind of challenge, because we're busy. The nurses are being pulled in multiple directions. They're required to, you know, take extra time to gown and to mask, assure the patients are gowned, cleaning differently between the rooms, and to make sure everybody's safe when they come into the hospital. So it creates a challenge for our people who may be trafficked, because they may actually get into the emergency room, treated and released without being identified. And the problem is, because we're so busy, those patients are easily triggered and they need time. We need time to separate them from whoever they're with, so that we can assess safety and really ask those pointed questions, really looking beneath that surface and really trying to identify those subtle signs of being trafficked, and then to offer them the right resources and provide them education and let them know, look, we're concerned for your safety. So yes, we have had a fair amount of challenges, but we absolutely are there and facing those challenges. And I think actually they're doing very well.
Is it just is difficult. You know, you brought up the point that nurses are so incredibly busy. Has anyone been giving them the idea, hey, just remember, don't forget these folks still are coming into the emergency rooms, and just a reminder to add to their plate, please, you know, make sure you ask a question or just take a closer look?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the good thing is that we've been educating on the issue of human trafficking since the past 6-7 years now. And so our physicians are educated. People in registration are becoming educated. Our social workers are well educated. So patients are really coming into the ER and they're seeing a lot of different people. And so if one person doesn't identify, someone might notice something isn't quite right and alert the physicians. We're very fortunate that the medical providers are pretty well educated, but that doesn't mean that we don't have a long way to go. We still have to continue ongoing education to be able to intervene for the patients and to assess safety and offer intervention and connect them to our partners in the community.
All right, thank you so much. Jim, I want to jump over to you. You are on the front lines, you're on the street, you're seeing it. What is the task force seeing these days, and how's it different?
What you're seeing mostly is continued victimization of those individuals that are online, whether they're children or adults. Most of our victims know their traffickers in some form or fashion, and that's usually through a relationship that has been built up online, whether it's a social app, a dating app, something like that. So, you know, not only for the children to have good conversations with your children, you know, also your friends and family members that are adults too. Have those conversations, you know, ask them questions and say, hey, where are you going? I mean, now, you know, you can't really get together in large groups. And if people are going out, number one, that should spark a conversation like, oh, where are you going? You know, and just be interested in what your family members are doing, your friends are doing. Reach out and have that contact with them and know that you're available to help them. You know, practice grace, if you will. You know, and just be there for an individual that might need help at some point in time. But most of our victims, you know, continue to be victimized over the internet. And these are individuals that are vulnerable in our population. And then if they're secluded, now they're reaching out for, you know, somebody that will give them attention. And 9 times out of 10, a trafficker is waiting in the shadows online, ready to give that attention. And then once they get them in their grips, it's through force, fraud, or coercion that they keep them.
Something both you and Karen mentioned that just kind of shocked me is you both mentioned dating apps. Are dating apps becoming the places for traffickers to prey for victims, or how is that working? Because you both mentioned that, and I'm just curious as to the impact of dating apps and trafficking.
Well, with online activity, individuals, because you can't see a face, they can pose as somebody else and meet up with an individual. And eventually, obviously, the idea of a dating app eventually might be to meet up and continue an in-person relationship. Perfectly normal. You know, that's absolutely what that app's meant to do. But unfortunately, with some of these apps, actually all the apps, there's going to be individuals there that are trying to game the system, if you will, and they have nefarious motives behind them. And they're going to utilize that platform to make money for them. And that's by recruiting individuals. So not only in sex trafficking, but labor trafficking as well. We don't see too much labor trafficking. A majority of our cases with the task force are sex trafficking cases, but we can't forget about the labor trafficking piece as well.
One of the other things I noticed is that you're thinking that the higher cases of where trafficking is happening is also potentially happening in communities where there's higher rates of COVID infection. Can you talk a little bit about that and the impact that it's having?
Well, if you have individuals that are if they're being trafficked, and if we're talking about sex trafficking, they're meeting individuals that are, and they're engaging in something that's really close together, sexual activity. 9 times out of 10, when we do undercover operations, protection, prophylactics are non-existent most of the time. And when you tell somebody to throw a mask on as well, those are usually non-existent as well. We conducted a trafficking undercover operation during the pandemic through the Attorney General's office. All our sister task forces conducted it throughout the state. You'd be surprised how many people, individuals that showed up to our undercover sites without that basic protection that the state and government has been preaching. Wear your face mask.
My goodness. Sandra, I'm going to jump down to you. Your agency, obviously the respite and recovery center for many of these survivors, but during the pandemic, a lot of that changed. How was the Rape Crisis Center impacted by all this?
So our message to the public is Cleveland Rape Crisis Center is here for you. And in fact, now you have even more ways to connect with us than you did before. We have survivors who call us, who text us on the hotline. We have survivors who use an online chat, and we have survivors who walk through our doors, and we are open for them. And we've all embraced telehealth. So in some ways, survivors have even more access to services, although the perception may be the opposite of that. So I think all of the partners on the call, our message is, COVID is not stopping us. We're not using that as an excuse to offer help and support. We are being really creative and innovative. And even when there isn't a health pandemic, the barriers for survivors of trafficking to reach out and ask for help are extraordinary. You add the pandemic is just one more thing that they have to deal with. But what we also know is survivors of human trafficking are the strongest and most courageous people we could ever meet. And it's an honor for all of our agencies to be able to walk on that journey with survivors to a place of health and safety.
You bring up an excellent point about, how this pandemic has changed the way not only do we do business, but also how we connect with one another. I'm just going to throw this out to the rest of you. Is there a silver lining from this pandemic of something we may have learned that we can take with us in the future? Sandra brought up a great point about, we're using telehealth and we're using technology even more. But are you all finding anything relating to the pandemic that at least we're like, hey, look, we can do this better? Or any parts of your, phases of what you do? Jump in, everybody.
I can answer in regards to the hospital setting. I will say that we are so fortunate in Cleveland. We have SANE nurses. The major hospitals have SANE nurses, and all the hospitals in the Cleveland area have been educated on human trafficking thanks to the collaborative. And that said, if there is anyone out there who knows of anyone that needs help or does not feel safe, it is safe to come to the hospital because the SANE nurse will come in. We have nurses on call 24/7. There's been times when our nurses aren't on call and the hospital will call us. We will come in and we have the time, because we have a program, to take all the time they need. They're not in and out of there in an hour. We can sit and talk to them. We can educate them. We can connect them right then and there to the Rape Crisis Center. And if the Rape Crisis Advocate can't come in because of COVID, we're going to connect them by phone. We do that all the time. So we've realized, okay, this doesn't work because of COVID, we're going to do something else, because we want to provide victim-centered care. And it's so important to get medical care.
Kirsty, let me throw this out to you. Is there a need for a different type of strategy during the pandemic? Is there anything you guys are looking at doing differently?
I think the silver lining that sort of came to my mind in all of this is that we are so fortunate in the Cleveland community that we have this coordinated response system in place that has been built, that's really strong. All of the people and many, many more on this call have really strong relationships or trusting relationships. We can call each other. We all have each other's cell phones. So there is this relationship that's there, and that we've definitely are able to build upon as these hardships come upon us. So that's definitely a silver lining. But yes, I do think we had to re-strategize. We had to move a lot of the meetings online. I think we had struggles with working opportunities. But again, we worked around that. We called each other. We find other ways to connect and make the work happen. So I think it's just really using those relationships and continuing the collaborative efforts that were already in place.
I want to do a round robin here and just ask all of you, people sitting at home, maybe they're not as educated about this issue, but everybody is itching for something to do and something to make a difference. So, Jim, let me start with you. If there's anything people can do, what would you like people to know? How would you like them to get involved? How would you like them to make a difference?
Keep an eye out again for your friends or family. If you haven't had contact with them recently, if they've kind of dropped off the face of the earth, reach out to them, see if they're okay. Not only from a trafficking aspect, but a mental health aspect. Just do that friendly check-in. There are organizations that can help, whether it's law enforcement. If you suspect there's trafficking, if it's a lights and sirens response that's needed, call 911. If it's just a tip that you want to forward, call our task force at 216-443-6085. We'll be more than happy to chat with you. And just keep a watchful eye. Who knows how much longer we're going to be doing this virtual thing. But from that, all of us have been very, we're responding and we're adapting to the situation like everyone else. Just last week we had an interview with a witness that was in Alaska that we would have had to jump on a plane to go to Alaska to do the interview, but we did it virtually. Is that the most ideal situation? No, but we did a workaround for that. So you have a lot of people here that are, and a lot of organizations that want to help. And the only other thing I can think of with the pandemic, I'm sure some of our nonprofit partners, they might have some money issues coming up in the future. And the law enforcement piece is a very small piece of all of this, which really the heavy lifters are partners in this, anything from therapy to housing. And I would hate to see for any of those services to go away because of lack of funding.
You also brought up a great point is, if you see something, say something. Can you give me a quick 2 or 3 points of what people should look for?
If there's somebody that's controlling an individual, if they're doing all the talking for them, if they have tattoos on them that they can't explain, property of, daddy, some things that are just off. If you're able to have the conversation with the individual, have those conversations if you feel safe doing it, and let them know that there's help out there. If it's somebody that you don't know and you want to report it, reach out to the task force. We'll take all the calls. If it's something that turns out to be not trafficking, it might be something else, or it may be nothing. But it'll be a good training exercise for us at least, right? But don't be afraid to reach out and say something is my point. Again, you have a lot of organizations, whether it's through law enforcement, through Project STAR, contact the collaborative. There's a lot of avenues that you can reach out to pass a tip along or seek help.
Sandra, your agency is so critical on so many different levels. Can you talk about things that you might need? What can people do if they want to get involved and help?
The Cleveland Rape Crisis Center and many of the organizations in the collaborative, we do rely on donations to keep our services up and running. We rely on volunteers, and we rely on the general public being informed and aware that this is an issue in our community, and anything that you can do to advance that helps.
Karen, let me jump at you. Anything you can suggest that you think people might need to know?
I just wanted to reiterate that we know that kids out there, families out there are just in survival mode. And now we've been in survival mode for a very long time. So, Belfair and all of our other community partners are here to help with whatever that is. So if you all of a sudden lost, you know, your food benefits, or you're struggling with food insecurity, that is probably the number one thing that we are worrying about, because then unfortunately, if you don't have many options, you might connect with someone that's going to manipulate you to get that food. So that's why it's very basic needs that many of our youth are trying to take care of. And we just want to make sure that the youth, the families, that people know that, again, that Belfair is here, and we know that you're just trying to survive, and also like that you're not in trouble. You know, that all victims get in these situations and they had no intention of becoming a victim of sex trafficking. So someone has coerced them and manipulated them, and many parents and kids, like, they're not going to call it that. They might just say that they're in this like toxic relationship. So it's important that we're listening, and as Jim said, like, being compassionate and kind and checking in on each other, because really that's really what we need to do to keep getting through this pandemic.
Great point. Kathleen, how about you? Is there anything that the public can do to make your life easier? And I want to just throw this one out there, and you can tell me if you think our local hospitals need it. But, you know, I was made aware that, you know, when a survivor comes in for treatment, and Sandra, you can relate to this as well. When somebody comes in for treatment, you know, their clothes are used as evidence. And you know, getting clothes to a hospital or something for these people to go home and have something to wear because they had to take their other stuff for evidence. Is that something people can do to help?
Yeah, so I really want to say that we have multiple partners beyond who is on this call. I work with everybody here so closely, but we have people, other organizations that do donate clothes. We are so thankful. One is the National Council of Jewish Women, and these clothes are brand new, undergarments and all of that. That is so important for them. It brings back a little bit of the humanity. But I do want to say that we want to start by believing in the community and understanding human trafficking is a complex trauma. And these people that are being trafficked, it's not for us to judge. They're in that situation because of some vulnerability. Maybe there was abuse at home or something that made them have to be on the street. And so we don't understand, and we need to just take a minute and understand this type of trauma and start by believing so that they can get help, and that will initiate healing. And so, yeah, so that's the most important thing I think would like to relay.
Great advice. And Kirsty, I want to end with you. Any advice you can give to the public, anything they can do to get involved?
Absolutely. I think getting educated, like many others already said, is the key, right? You have the poster behind you, Monica. It happens here too. Ask questions. Why does it happen? Who does it happen to? How can I help, right? So call us. We will talk to anybody. Like Kathy says, we educate doctors, nurses, business people, social workers, you name it, we will be there. So educate yourself, talk to people about it, call us, get involved, volunteer, donate. There's so many different ways to get connected, but don't stay silent, don't feed into the shadows. Be part of the solution. That's what we want the public to know. And you can, everyone can. We need everyone to be a part of this.
Great final point. All of you, thank you so much. Please do your best to stay well. And for those of you who are watching, please take advantage. You can check out our web story. We will include the phone numbers of places you can help, and we'll also include web links of places you can get educated. Again, thank you all so much. And hopefully we will see one another in person sooner rather than later. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Take care.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Have a good night, everybody.
Yeah.